To say I was underprepared for confronting Cronus would be the understatement of the year. I was not ready. I had wanted to visit Faust for advice and Griffin Drive to leave a note in case I never came back. Yet Legion had thrust me into this fight head on. Perhaps it was best. I could not turn back now. Frick jumped from my bag, tin can armor dinging against his little metal cap. From my bag, he pulled a lance, 10 times his length, and aimed it at Cronus. "For the Queen and the little prince!" His tiny voice screamed as he charged the old god. He didn't get too far before Cronus swatted him aside, snapping his lance in half. The crazy god grew younger. The sand in the hourglass behind him moved in reverse, in unison with his age. Where he was once old and feeble, he now stood tall and strong, the perfect image of the mighty titan he was. Frick stood up slowly. He eyed the massive force before him, and then looked towards me and smiled. "For you, my queen, who saw beauty where there is none, and showed kindness to all." He pulled off his homemade armor and picked up his broken weapon, one piece in each hand. With his cat-like ears held low and flat against his wrinkly bald head, he ran at the bemused Cronus again. I struggled to remove Myuuji from the bag. This was a long-range weapon, and one I had never fired even once. I slid the first blessed bullet into the chamber and racked it. Frick was all over the room, running off walls, bouncing from furniture, swiping at Cronus any time he got close. With each swipe, his tattoos began to glow brighter and brighter. I'd seen plenty of movies with snipers. I could do this. Frick landed a blow to one of Cronus's sandaled feet. Gods have hearts too, right? I looked down the scope. I was too close. I could only see a blur of color. Frick had Cronus facing away from me. Opening both eyes, I aimed where I thought his heart would be. Inhale. Slow exhale. Squeeze the trigger. The kick Myuuji gave me startled me so bad I dropped it. The explosive bang as the bullet tore out of the gun had my ears ringing with a high-pitched squeal. The rest of the blessed bullets rolled out of my bag as it hit the floor. They were silver and sparkled in the flickering light of the fire. A warmth spread through my chest. I did it! The coppery scent of blood mingled with the strange aroma of fresh bread, and time hadn't even stuck. The bullet, forged from the blessed sword of Masamune, hung suspended in the air, frozen in time. Cronus's lips pulled apart and spread upwards in a vulgar display of teeth. He roared with laughter. His left hand gripped Frick by his scrawny neck, knuckles turning white as he squeezed. Frick pulled at the fingers that wrung his neck, his hind legs kicking like a cat at the wrists that held him aloft. His mouth opened and his eyes bulged. He pointed one finger at me, and tears rained down his face. Cronus threw my little elf, discarding him like a used tissue. The warmth spreading through my chest wasn't happiness, it was blood. Cronus deftly completed the arc his scythe had made, slicing me open as the gun had fallen from my grip. It cut through the unplumbed satchel strap and my flesh like butter. His left hand now free, he held it before him, palm up. My bullets began to melt, all of them hanging in the air now. Myuuji floated up, the gun disintegrating before my very eyes. He flung my only weapon away, the pieces still caught in a reverse time.
Did you really think you could attack me? A silly, powerless mortal girl like you? I have eaten my children for breakfast.
If I remember right, that didn't work out so great for you. He raged at my sass. From the corner of my eye, I saw the molten steel of the rifle and bullets streak out. The long, perfect lines of two legendary swords. The stock and forestock of the gun had split in two, creating magnificent scabbards. Frick drug his battered body towards the shining katanas. Cronus raised his scythe over his shoulder and brought it down toward my neck. My body reacted by throwing my arms up in defense. Long spider leg fractures bloomed in the blade. The tender tattoos running up my forearms had risen and glittered. A wave of white, opalescent scales rippled up both my arms. He stepped forward and grabbed at me. Ducking his reach, I kicked him in the balls as hard as I could. He dropped to a knee with a whoosh of pain and protectively grabbed at his junk. Turning on my heel, I ran. Frick lay dazed by the Miramasa and Masamune blades. Scooping up all three, I barreled out the door and found myself atop a very steep hill, overlooking golden wheat fields and the remains of a ruined kingdom. "You bleed, my queen." "So do you, Frick." Cronus screamed for me to stop. I hesitated to catch my breath before plunging myself and Frick down the hill and into the swaying wheat. The tall stalks tickled my arms as I ran through the fields. Frick clung to my shoulder as his body trembled. "Where are we?" "I think," Frick's heart thundered against my collarbone, "I think we're in the Elysian fields." I came to an abrupt halt. I thought that was the home of the blessed dead. I thought it was a paradise made for the heroes of lore. I raked my eyes over the horizon. What could have been magnificent buildings at one time now lay in heaps of rubble, some still smoldering in agony. It looked like a bomb had gone off. The breeze that blew at my hair sung through the ripe wheat. The stalks bent and danced. "Run," they whispered to me. "Where are all the heroes?" I knelt in the amber field, the stalks hiding our quivering bodies, and tore off my shirt, stuffing the clover brooch into the pocket of the jeans. Ripping the shirt into strips, I wrapped Frick's wounds and tried to staunch the bleeding of my own. He ran a finger over the scales on my arms, whispering to himself about the benefits of dragon armor. "Don't look at the ground." Frick's voice broke, and he began to tremble. I wish I hadn't. I truly wished I had never looked down at the soiled earth beneath us. Bodies everywhere. The defiled wheat grew up and out of the corpses laid in neat little rows. It sprouted from their eye sockets, tufts of roots weaving just beneath the skin, lesions of wheat ripped out of their flesh. Every single mouth was forced open in silent screams, drowned by the wheat spewing forth from their engorged throats. I grabbed a fistful of the foul grain and pulled it from the nearest body. It came up in nasty clumps, dripping with a fetid slime. The mouth I had freed gulped in air and spoke.
"Run, child, run. If I, Ajax, and Achilles himself, fell in the battle against the harvester, you have no hope. Leave this place."
"You're alive!" I squealed and began ripping more of the weed away.
"No, my weary soul came to this paradise to rest. Instead, we were betrayed. He has gone mad with his thirst for power. He planted our souls, left us here to rot, while this hellish grain sprouts from us, slowly sapping our souls of strength."
"Let me—" I was cut off by a thunderous voice that shook even the wheat.
"Fee!"
"Run, child, run." Ajax gurgled as his throat bulged out with fresh seedlings. Their sprouting leaves preceded the milky foam of Ajax's last words.
"Fie!"
"We have to hide." Frick climbed up my back and perched on my shoulder, one hand steadying himself with my ear.
"Foe! Fum! I smell your blood, oh cursed one."
I slid Miramasa and Masamune through my belt and began an awkward hunched-over speed waddle through the wheat.
"Be you alive, or be you dead?"
Cronus's stomps shook the ground, and I stumbled in the waving wheat.
I'll crush your bones to make my bread.
I crawled forwards on my hands and knees. Souls moaned in pain as I trampled over them. A flaccid hand poked through the stalks, pointing ahead. The frail arm that guided our way was attached to what once would have been the most beautiful woman I had ever set my eyes upon. Her long hair was tangled and caught in the growing wheat. A small weasel nested in the webbing. It quickly climbed down and ran before us, stopping ever so often to ensure we followed. It took us through the seemingly never-ending fields until it finally stopped and parted the stalks ahead, showing us the crumbling remains of the ancient blessed city.
"Think you clamped this?"
Frick whispered. Cronus still stomped amongst his cursed grains, ripping up clumps of soul and wheat in his fury to find us. "Galanthus?" I asked Frick.
"Yes, my lady. Alkmene's trusted maid."
"Who?" "We'll talk later." I shushed him as I rushed us through the city of ruins, searching for darkness to call Legion. It was too bright. There wasn't a shadow in sight, not even my own. The sun beat down on us, sweat stinging the slash across my chest and dripping in my eyes. An eternal high noon, most likely caused by Cronus's magic. We were at a great disadvantage. Instead of a rifle, I now had swords. The only shadows I knew of were back in Cronus's little house. In order to get there, we'd have to run back across the acres of wheat. He'd never look for us in his house, would he? I bobbed and weaved through the remains of the once glorious city. Everywhere I looked spoke volumes of the war that had been waged here. The best of the best, the heroes whose tales we still speak of hundreds of years later, had lived here. Cronus had taken every single one out, and I thought I could defeat him myself. What a fool I am. Frick tugged on my ear and pointed through the shattered pieces of a stained glass window. Just beyond it was a small trail leading up the cliff to Cronus's house. He was in the city now. Rocks and dust bounced against the ground around us, signaling his proximity was closer than ever before.
"I can smell you."
I ducked behind the building and began creeping as quickly as I dared to the little path.
Come out, wherever you are."
His voice echoed and bounced back at us from the cliff's precipice. The path was so narrow and right along the edge. Peering over, there was nothing but mist below, just a vast nothingness. I wouldn't want to go tumbling over. Boo! Cronus's hot, moist breath splattered the back of my neck. Frick growled and spun on my shoulder. "Hold on!" I hissed at Frick as I began running. I stumbled once, twice, one foot skidding over the edge and twisting. With a heavy, wet thud on my back, I found myself face down on the path, a clump of earth and soul between my shoulder blades. Frick had been flung off somewhere to my right, away from the cliff edge. Cronus picked me up by my ankle like I was a rag doll and slammed me down onto the ground. He was screaming something at me, but I couldn't hear him over the buzzing in my head. All I saw was bright flashes of stars as I tried and failed to breathe. I laid there, gasping for breath as he leered over me, raving about something. He reached down and grabbed me by my undershirt, yanking me to my feet. One leg dangled over the darkening mist below. Frick came out of nowhere and climbed Cronus like a rabid squirrel. He raised one clawed hand up and whipped it down, his nails dragging down over Cronus's eye. He grabbed Frick and threw him over the edge. Time slowed as I watched Frick flailing in the air, his eyes wide with terror. I yanked a katana from my belt and flung it out over the mist, hilt firmly in my hand. The scabbard slid down the blade, light catching on the hata. Frick grasped the scabbard and ran up Masamune to my arm, finding the safety of my shoulder. As the scabbard fell from the blade and spun down into the mists below, Bloodlust and rage filled my chest. It bubbled up and out of me, knotting tightly in my heart and heating the air between myself and Cronus. His eyes grew wide at my sudden change of attitude. His arm lowered just enough for the tips of my toes to touch the ground. One foot behind the other, balancing precariously on the precipice. One hand behind the other, tightly gripping the tsuka, poised to strike from my right. Inhale. Exhale. Sweep up! Cronus's left arm and a chunk of his shoulder fell away, bouncing against the cliff face as it descended into the ever-darkening mists below. He howled in pain and released me. Just like butter, I grinned to myself. I could feel the Myuuji blade's demonic aura slipping over my arm like a silken glove. Turning away from screaming Cronus, I pulled Masamune's blade from its spot against my hip. Frick pulled the scabbard away and slid it over Myuuji, now neatly tucked away. Myuuji slept once more. I raised Masamune over my head and brought it down in one quick straight arch. It cut through the air with a definitive whoosh, cutting a path through the wheat field before me. The heavy wheat berries crumbled to the earth. The imprisoned souls began to rise up. Another quick slash as I ran for the house, and more wheat fell. No! Cronus screamed and ran for me, clutching the gaping wound where his shoulder used to be. The weakened souls of the heroes clambered towards him, slowing him down as he plowed forwards. We made it to the house and slammed the door shut. Not that it could keep out Cronus, but it could hold back the light. It was still so bright, though. Legion! Legion!
Extinguish the light.
Frick limped through the room, closing the shutters on the windows and blowing out candles as I tried to stamp out the fire. The door exploded in, flying off the hinges and knocking Frick into the air. It was a solid thunk. Frick's limp body hit the floor hard and skidded under a table. Frick! No! I found myself shrieking. Cronus blocked my passage to Frick, who was suddenly sucked into a darkness that was more than mere shadow. Legion had him. Frick would be okay. Cronus pulled his scythe from thin air. His breaths came in quick, shallow huffs. His face red from either anger or exertion. The wound on his shoulder was closed up, leaving a nasty, gnarled scar. He had sped up his own healing time. Wildly, he swung the unwieldy scythe. I tried blocking, but Masamune was knocked from my hands. He swung again, and the blade of the scythe cracked against my dragon-scaled arms. In his frenzy, he didn't notice and continued to wail on me. Each smack of the broken scythe scooted me closer and closer to the fire. Now that both Cronus's body and mine were blocking the light from the fireplace, the shadows grew and stretched up the walls and across the ceiling, reaching for me and licking at the edges of the firelight. "Reach for us," Legion cried out to me. My armored arms ached and were becoming heavy from the abuse.
Moira, reach!
If I could just stretch my hand out just a little bit more. My heel caught the lip of the hearth, and I came crashing down onto my butt. My body rocked back and my head collided with the stone facing of the firebox. My hand was in the fire, but I felt no heat. The dragon scales! I grabbed a fistful of embers and threw them up into Cronus's face. He yelped and teetered backwards. Preparing to dive into Legion's waiting arms, I stood too quickly and rammed my head into the mantel lip. The stars exploded in my eyes. I was momentarily blinded. Cronus took advantage of this and grabbed my undershirt again. It tore against his meaty fingers, so he pinned me against the wall with his knee and brought his burnt, smoking, blistering, and bleeding face up to mine.
"I shall relish torturing you,"
he hissed.
"Over and over. If I get too tired, I'll just play time backwards and forwards as I watch you bleed. You will beg for me to end you, and only when I grow bored shall I offer you escape. But only at the cost of the child."
He released a torrent of maniacal belly laughs. It was deep and demonic. If I thought he was mad before, he was definitively madder now. I struggled to reach Miramasa, still safely tucked away in my belt. Every time I reached for it, Cronus deepened the pressure he pinned me with, making it difficult to breathe and digging into the weeping cut across my shoulder. The golden hourglass tipped and rolled off the mantel, landing neatly in my hand. He raised the scythe, pushing the shattered piece into my forehead, and dug it down my face, mirroring the damage Frick had done to his own. As it dropped from my chin and descended towards my collarbone, I smashed the hourglass into the rock facing and brought it up, fully intending to slam the jagged glass into his thigh, but stopped. Cronus was as a statue, the scythe poised to strike at me again. His eyes were wide and wild with fear. His mouth hung open in astonishment. My right hand, the one gripping the broken hourglass, was completely dragon. Fingers covered in pearl-colored scales and tipped with deep blue talons. Nephilim runes, like deep, mysterious scars, covered my scaled arm and sizzled with energy. The golden sands of the hourglass trickled and swirled around the broken glass. I held my hand up and examined the glass. The sand flowed up with it. Cronus seemed to be struggling to flinch away from the glittering bits.
"Moira."
The cold tone of the familiar voice that called to me brought tears to my eyes. The white-haired watcher stepped from the shadows.
"What you are about to do comes with a large cost. Are you aware?"
There was no concern in his voice, only curiosity. "Charlie." His name sobbed from my lips before I could stop myself. He merely cocked his head at me. His hand reached out and took a tear from my cheek, rolling it between his thumb and pointer like he'd never seen one before. He sighed heavily.
"I am a watcher. I was here before your kind's beginning, and I'll be here after its end. I am your galaxy, your universe. Every part of you is a part of me. I am your world."
"You were..." I choked and tried to hide the tears that fell freely now. He scrunched his brow in disapproval, like I had seen 1,000 times before.
"I see all, and I know all. I have seen our past, and know our history."
He paused and pulled me out from Cronus's crushing grip, forcing me to face him.
"But I no longer feel it. I have no need to be tainted by human emotions. That part of me is gone, wiped clean. I am not your Charlie, not anymore."
"No," I sobbed. "You're not." I gripped the hourglass tighter. The runes and magics across my body began to glow and burn. I didn't mind the physical pain. It distracted me from the ache deep in my soul. I turned to Cronus, still frozen, the sands of time still slowly whirling around him, and thrust the jagged, broken glass deep into his chest. I pulled it out and plunged it into him again, and again, and again. I screamed and I screamed. Every time the glass bit into his flesh, the pieces that tore away turned into the golden sand and joined the growing whirlwind around us. There was nothing left of Cronus but a massive, whirling wall of golden, glittering sand when I was done. I barely noticed as it cycloned down, funneling into the hourglass in my hand. Such was my grief. When it was done, a tiny version of itself sat in my palm. A time turner, I thought to myself, just like Hermione's. I'd always wanted one. I stood, brushed myself off, wiped my tears, and pushed past the nameless watcher, slipping into the welcoming shadows. Griffin Drive was a hive of activity. Luke and Mamaroo laughed on the lawn with our new friends, James, Gabe, Red, Jackson, and Neil. The Sirens, Harpies, Phoenix, and Raven played a game of tag in the air. Guardian spirits, elves, and others flitted about the yard, plates of food and cups of drinks in their paws, listening to Frick animatedly telling of our adventure. Nixie and Rory floated in a kiddie pool under Kit's watchful gaze. Death stood in the middle of it all with a squalling Dante. Judging by the look on her face, he needed his diaper changed. I sat on my chair on the porch and watched it all. My healing tattoos itched, and the chain of my small hourglass brushed against the stitches in my chest. My heart was still heavy. Rory still called for his chawi. How would I ever tell him the truth? That he still lived. He knew everything we'd ever been through, but felt nothing for us anymore. That death had stripped him of his human emotions.
You have to stop calling me.
The nameless watcher stared down at me. I studied his face. I knew every line. I knew how, if he'd just smile, the corners of his eyes would crinkle. I knew the way his lips would twitch when he tried not to laugh. I missed the look of pure adoration he'd get when he gazed at Rory. I knew if I didn't let go of the man that was, that Rory's heart would shatter along with mine. Looking away, I thrust my plate at him. Eat this.
But I...
Just shut up and eat. I stood and stepped down from my porch. I heard him take the first bite of the peanut butter and jelly sandwich and turned to look at him. His brow furrowed and his eyes crinkled.
Joey!
Rory streaked across the yard and plowed into the nameless one's legs, hugging them fiercely. He raised his little face up and locked eyes with the cosmic being standing over him. The nameless one cocked his head to the side, PB&J smeared in the corner of his twitching lips. He swallowed, and I swear his white hair got a shade darker, and his eyes sparkled.
What the fuck is this?
I am Moira, mother of ruin, queen to a little horde of elves, sister to the great Rourke Kincaid, mother of a forbidden child, friend of myths, and keeper of time. This was my story.